The forest was gone, replaced by an endless void. The tracks ahead seemed to stretch into nothingness, the train moving forward as if suspended in space. Pray now, before it's too late. His father's words echoed in his mind, louder than the whispers, louder than his own heartbeat. For the first time in years, Ez felt the weight of his skepticism collapse under the crushing reality of what he faced. He fell to his knees and clasped his hands together. "God," he whispered, his voice breaking, "if you can hear me, please, help me." As Ez knelt in the empty train carriage, he felt the air shift around him. The whispers grew louder, almost melodic, though their words remained indecipherable. His prayers faltered as the sense of being watched crept over him. Slowly, he turned his head. At the far end of the carriage stood a figure, a man in a dark conductor's uniform. His face was obscured by shadow, but his posture was unnervingly rigid, as if he were carved from stone. "Where are we?" Easy demanded, his voice shaking. "What's happening?" The conductor didn't move. The train jolted, and the lights flickered, casting brief glimpses of the figure. For a split second, Ease thought he saw something unnatural about him. His limbs too long, his neck slightly bent, his shadow shifting independently. "Where are we going?" Easy shouted, his fear giving way to desperation. The conductor tilted his head, his voice a low, rumbling drawl. "You will see soon enough." "No," Ezra said, his fists clenched. "I deserve to know." The conductor raised a hand, and Ezra's voice was silenced as though an invisible force had stolen it from him. The figure stepped closer, the lights dimming with each step. "You were warned," the conductor said. "You ignored her prayers, you ignored the signs, and now you must face what comes next." Ezra's knees buckled, and he collapsed into his seat. The conductor turned sharply and vanished into the adjoining carriage. Easy sat trembling, the gravity of his situation settling over him like a suffocating weight. The night was eerily silent in Lagos, but Ngozi's small living room was alive with her fervent prayers. Her rosary dangled loosely in one hand, while the other rested on her open Bible, pages dampened by her tears. The visions had returned, sharper and more vivid, leaving her trembling and breathless. Ngozi clutched her chest as the image of Ise flashed before her mind's eye. He was seated in an empty train, his face contorted in fear, and behind him loomed shadowy figures, their elongated limbs reaching toward him. She could feel his despair, a tangible weight pressing against her spirit. "Lord, what is this?" she whispered. "What is happening to him?" She closed her eyes, and the vision shifted. The train sped toward a broken bridge, its tracks mangled and suspended over a deep ravine. In the distance, a glowing figure appeared, its light piercing through the darkness. But before the train could reach it, the scene vanished, replaced by the sound of Easy calling her name. Ngozi opened her eyes, her heart racing. She couldn't sit idly by any longer. She needed help. Throwing a scarf over her shoulders, she stepped outside into the chilly night air. The streets were deserted, save for the occasional barking dog or distant hum of a generator. She knocked on the door of Mama Chinière, her trusted neighbor and friend. The older woman answered almost immediately, as though she had been expecting her. "Ngozi, my child," she said, her voice soft but steady. "What troubles you?" "My husband," Ngozi said, her voice breaking. "I fear he's in grave danger. I've been praying, but it's not enough. I need others to pray with me." Mama Chinyere nodded without hesitation. "Let's gather the prayer group. The Lord hears the cries of many." Within the hour, a small circle of women had assembled in Ngozi's living room, their voices rising in unison as they called upon God for protection. The air grew heavy with their prayers, and Ngozi felt a warmth enveloped her as if the very room had been filled with light. As the prayers reached a crescendo, Ngozi fell into a trance. Her vision returned, but this time it was clearer than ever. She saw the glowing figure standing on the tracks, its arms outstretched as the train hurtled toward it. Behind the figure, the broken bridge loomed, its jagged edges glinting in the moonlight. In the vision, she heard her own voice, faint but firm. "Ease, pray. Pray as if your life depends on it, for it does." The vision faded, and Ngozi gasped, her eyes snapping open. The women around her were still deep in prayer, but Ngozi knew what she had to do. She fell to her knees and cried out, "Lord, let him hear me. Let him see what I have seen. Save my husband." Easy sat, trembling in his seat, the conductor's cryptic warning still ringing in his ears. He felt trapped, as though the walls of the carriage were closing in on him. The whispers had grown louder, their cadence rhythmic, almost like a chant. The shadows in the corners of the train danced and flickered, their shapes shifting unpredictably. He glanced out the window, hoping for some sense of normalcy, but the void outside remained unchanged. The tracks glowed faintly, suspended in the infinite blackness. Suddenly, he felt a strange presence beside him. He turned sharply, but there was nothing there, just the empty seat. A low, guttural growl echoed through the carriage, sending a shiver down his spine. The air grew colder, and his breath came out in faint puffs of mist. Easy clutched his chest, his pulse racing. The train seemed alive, its groans and creaks resonating like the heartbeat of a beast. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, deep and resonant, echoing in his mind. "You cannot escape." Ise stood, his legs unsteady, and stumbled down the aisle. He needed to find the conductor, the passengers, anyone who could tell him what was happening. As he passed each row, he felt the shadows pressing closer, brushing against him like cold fingers. He reached the door to the adjoining carriage and yanked it open. The wind howled as he stepped onto the narrow passageway between cars. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure standing in the distance, its outline glowing faintly. "Eze," the voice was faint, familiar. "Pray." He froze. "Ngozi," he whispered, his voice trembling. But the figure vanished, and the door behind him slammed shut. The train jolted violently, and Easy stumbled forward into the next carriage. Easy staggered into the next carriage, but something was wrong. The space felt larger, the seats distorted and stretching into the darkness. The lights above flickered erratically, casting strange angular shadows that danced across the walls. As he moved further in, the air grew thicker, almost suffocating. The walls seemed to pulse, their surfaces rippling like the skin of a living creature. Eze stopped, his breath hitching, as he realized the seats were no longer empty. Figures sat silently in each row, their faces turned toward him. "Hello?" Eze called out, his voice weak. The figures didn't move. Their faces were obscured, their bodies unnaturally still. Easy took a cautious step forward, and the figures turned in unison, their heads snapping toward him with a sickening crack. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their mouths moved, but no sound came out. Easy stumbled back, his heart pounding. The figures began to rise, their movements jerky and inhuman. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic, as if the very walls of the train were speaking to him. He bolted toward the far end of the carriage, his footsteps echoing. As he reached the door, a deafening roar filled the air, and the train lurched violently. He fell to the floor, gasping for breath as the carriage around him seemed to melt, the walls warping and twisting into grotesque shapes. Through the haze of fear, Eze heard his wife's voice, faint but clear. "Pray, Eze, pray now." Ezzy pressed himself against the door at the end of the carriage, his body trembling as the distorted figures advanced toward him. Their glowing eyes seemed to pierce through his very soul, and the whispers had grown to a deafening roar. He tried the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The air in the carriage felt alive, heavy with a sinister energy that made it hard to breathe. "Let me out," he shouted, his voice hoarse. But his cries were swallowed by the oppressive noise around him. His fingers fumbled for the handle again, his palms slick with sweat. The figures were closer now, their movements jerky, their mouths stretching open wider than seemed humanly possible. Suddenly, the carriage plunged into complete darkness. Ezzy froze, his heart pounding in the suffocating silence. The whispers ceased, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the train. The hum grew louder, vibrating through his body, until it coalesced into a single commanding voice. "Why do you run?" the voice boomed, echoing in the void. Eze spun around, but he couldn't see a thing. "Who are you? What do you want?" he shouted, his voice breaking. The voice chuckled, low and menacing. "You were warned, yet you refused to listen. Now you must face the consequences." Eze's knees buckled, and he fell to the floor, his hands clutching at the cold metal. "This isn't real," he whispered. "This can't be real." The voice softened, almost mocking. "Oh, it is very real, and you, Ez, are exactly where you're meant to be." A sudden flash of light illuminated the carriage, and Ez found himself face to face with the figures once more. Their mouths no longer moved, but the voice seemed to pour from them, echoing through the air. "Pray, Ez," the voice commanded, but there was no hint of compassion in its tone. "Pray, and perhaps you might survive." Ezzy gasped as the light faded, plunging him into darkness again. This time, the silence was absolute. His thoughts were a whirlwind of fear and regret, his mind replaying Gozi's warnings over and over. "Pray before you go." He dropped to his knees, his hands trembling. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe. "God," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I don't know if you can hear me. I don't even know if I deserve your help. But if you can, please, save me." As he remained on his knees, the faint golden light flickering above him like a fragile flame. As he continued to pray, the whispers began to recede, replaced by an eerie stillness. The air felt lighter, and he could finally breathe again. The train jolted suddenly, and Isis stumbled back to his seat. Through the window, he noticed a faint glow in the distance. At first, he thought it was the golden light that had appeared moments ago, but as the train sped closer, he realized it was something far more ominous. Ahead lay a broken bridge, its jagged remains silhouetted against the void. The tracks ended abruptly, leaving a yawning chasm that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. The train showed no signs of slowing. Easy's stomach churned as he stared at the inevitable disaster. "No, no, no," he muttered, his voice trembling. He rushed to the front of the carriage, banging on the door. "Stop the train! Someone stops the train!" The train jolted suddenly, and Isis stumbled back to his seat. Through the window, he noticed a faint glow in the distance. At first, he thought it was the golden light that had appeared moments ago, but as the train sped closer, he realized it was something far more ominous. Ahead lay a broken bridge, its jagged remains silhouetted against the void. The tracks ended abruptly, leaving a yawning chasm that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. The train showed no signs of slowing. Easy's stomach churned as he stared at the inevitable disaster. "No, no, no," he muttered, his voice trembling. He rushed to the front of the carriage, banging on the door. "Stop the train! Someone stops the train!" The figure placed a hand on his shoulder, and calmness washed over him. "Faith is the bridge," it said simply. "Have faith, and you will see." Ise closed his eyes, his voice rising in desperate prayer. Outside, the broken bridge loomed closer, the train's whistle screaming into the void. Back in Lagos, Ngozi was surrounded by the prayer group, their voices united in a powerful chorus. The intensity of their prayers seemed to vibrate through the room, a palpable energy that filled every corner. Ngozi's hands shook as she clutched her rosary, her tears flowing freely. "Lord, please hear us," she cried. "Deliver him from the hands of darkness, protect him, and bring him home safely." The women echoed her plea, their voices harmonizing as one. A sudden gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candlelight. The room fell into darkness, but Ngozi's voice did not falter. "His life is in your hands, Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "Show him the way, be his bridge over this disaster." As she prayed, a vivid vision filled her mind. She saw Eze kneeling on the floor of the train, his hands clasped in desperate prayer. Behind him, a radiant figure placed its hand on his shoulder, its light pushing back the darkness. The train was speeding toward the broken bridge, but the tracks ahead began to reform, glowing with golden light. Ngozi gasped, her heart leaping with hope. She clasped her hands tightly, whispering, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for hearing us." Eze kept his eyes shut, his voice hoarse from praying. The golden figure's warmth grew stronger, surrounding him like a protective shield. The whispers had ceased entirely, replaced by a resonant hum that filled the air. The train's speed didn't decrease, but Ise felt a sudden shift. The screeching of metal on metal faded, and the vibrations of the carriage softened. He opened his eyes to see the glowing figure standing at the front of the carriage, its arms outstretched toward the broken bridge. As the train approached the edge, golden tracks began to form out of thin air, extending across the ravine. The jagged edges of the broken bridge glimmered and fused, their pieces knitting together with an otherworldly brilliance. The train roared forward, the golden light enveloping it as it crossed the newly formed bridge. Iz fell back into his seat, his body trembling. He stared out the window as the darkness faded, replaced by a warm golden glow that bathed the landscape in light. The void was gone, and the twisted forest had transformed into a peaceful field, its grass swaying gently in the breeze. The train slowed, its wheels hissing as it came to a stop. The golden figure turned to Ez one final time. "Your faith has saved you," it said, its voice like a melody. "But remember this, it is not only for the desperate. Carry it with you always." With that, the figure disappeared, and Eze found himself standing alone in a grassy field, the train nowhere in sight. Eze stumbled through the field, his legs weak and his mind reeling from the events he had just experienced. The grass was soft beneath his feet, the air fresh and filled with the scent of wildflowers. He turned back, expecting to see the train, but it was gone, as though it had never existed. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Iz realized he was standing near a small village, its thatched roofs and smoke rising from chimneys a welcome sight. He walked toward the village, his heart filled with gratitude and an overwhelming need to see Ngozi. By the time he reached Lagos, the sun was high in the sky. He stumbled through the door of their home, his clothes disheveled and his face streaked with tears. "Ngozi," he called, his voice breaking. Ngozi ran to him, her own tears flowing as she embraced him tightly. "Isa," she whispered, holding him as though she would never let go, I prayed for you. I prayed so hard." He pulled back to look into her eyes, his voice trembling. "Your prayers saved me. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here." They sat together, Eze recounting the harrowing journey and the miraculous intervention that had saved him. As he spoke, Ngozi nodded, her face calm and serene. "Faith is the bridge," she said softly. "It's what carries us through the darkness." Word of Eze's miraculous story spread quickly through the community. Neighbors gathered at their home, eager to hear his testimony and to see the man who had survived a journey into darkness. Eze and Ngozi opened their doors to everyone, sharing not just the story, but the lessons they had learned. Eze spoke passionately about the power of faith, recounting how it had saved him when all seemed lost. "It wasn't just my prayers," he told the gathered crowd. "It was hers. It was the faith of those who never stopped believing, even when I couldn't see the way." Their home became a beacon of hope and faith, a place where people came to seek guidance and solace. Eze and Ngozi, once a couple divided by skepticism and belief, now stood united as pillars of their community. And though the memories of that fateful train ride would never leave him, Eze carried them not as a burden, but as a reminder of the power of faith and the strength of a love that refused to let go. Thank you for watching and joining us on this incredible journey. Be sure to explore more of our stories on the channel or click on the next video YouTube recommends. If this story touched your heart, please like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more captivating African tales. Don't forget to tap the notification bell to stay connected to the wisdom and beauty of these stories. Until next time, stay blessed and keep shining.